We kind of think we don't change our temperament because it's kind of just that. Remember, it's not the whole of your personality, so it's really only that part of you that tends to react in a certain way. So I have struggled like my whole life practically with not trying not to argue so much. The choleric temperament has a tendency to argue.
Here we go. Welcome to a special edition of the Focusing Way podcast. I'm your host, David Battistella. We call these special editions The Way is Love. Find The Focusing Way on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and our website, thefocusingway.com. Today on the Focusing Way podcast, temperaments. You think you know yourself. We're all born with distinct personality traits. Some love going to parties, while others seek solitude. Some are naturally brash and assertive, while others are content to just get along. Temperaments are a part of the way we're made. Author Laraine Bennett has a master's degree in philosophy and has co-authored 6 books with her husband Art, and 1 solo book, A Year of Grace, 365 Reflections for Caregivers. She helped create the popular temperamentquiz.com. Laraine has developed a game called Know Thyself, the Game of Temperaments, the first game to help you identify, understand, and appreciate your own temperament. Take charge or follow the lead. Jump in feet first or analyze and contemplate. Introvert or extrovert, focused or distractible. All of these traits point to the temperament you were born with. Which one is yours? Here to speak with us today is the game's inventor, Laraine Bennett. Laraine Bennett, welcome to The Way is Love and the Focusing Way podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. It's a real pleasure to be here.
I just want to start because just to give people a refresher, can we just talk a bit about the 4 temperaments and their basic characteristics?
Yeah. Actually, I was wondering if I could even back up just a tiny bit and just kind of distinguish between the way we write about temperament in our books, in The Temperament God Gave You and other books, is that we distinguish between temperament and your personality as a whole. So we're not claiming to be talking about your personality as a whole, but only one aspect of it, which is your temperament, which is the God-given temperament that we have sort of innately from birth. It's kind of like, we like to say it's the way God kickstarted our personalities. Right. He gives us a little temperament to start out with, know. Yeah. And so we want to say we're not trying to put people in boxes by saying this is your temperament, but just that's that part of you that is nature as opposed to nurture, and there's much more to our total personality and in fact our character than our temperament. But our temperament is a very vital thing to understand, because once we understand it, we actually can work on growing in many more ways instead of just kind of being driven to respond in the way that our temperament might indicate, like just by habit, we just tend to react this way, So it's kind of our tendency to react in a certain way. But we know that we're free to respond in different ways. So we can choose to respond in the way that maybe our nature kind of indicates, by our temperament, that we tend to be like, I tend to react really quickly, but that's something I have to kind of, work on, because I don't want to always be impulsive and quick to respond. Sometimes I need to wait and think about things, for a while. Yeah. So that's again, where our character comes in and our total personality and the virtues that we're trying to grow in. So I just wanted to clarify that it's kind of like a caveat, at the outset, that we're not saying that you're restricted by your temperament, that you can only respond to things these ways. No, it's just that tendency to respond that we are all given starting from birth.
Let's as you say that, what comes to mind for me is, let's call it, the temperament is one pathway towards knowing yourself better. And
Mm-hmm.
as we study temperaments, and people have studied them and sort of identified tendencies or traits or types, that information that we can glean out of that is a sort of a pathway to knowing ourselves better. Would that be a way of describing it as well?
No, that sounds perfect. That sounds excellent. Yeah.
Well, okay, so now that that's sort of done and we've got that as a framework, maybe we
Yeah.
could just talk about the way you put temperaments, the way we've divided them here.
Yeah. And this goes all the way back to Hippocrates, back to the ancient Greeks, who came up with these crazy, or this, the way of describing it, which is actually not so crazy, as it turns out. But they divided the temperaments among the choleric or choleric, the phlegmatic, the melancholic, and the sanguine. And originally, these were describing like an abundance of bodily fluids, which sounds like, oh, that's really hokey. But in fact, I think it's coming back around, like when people are talking about hormones today, like, oh, some people have an excess of dopamine, or some people have, these different. And it's basically the same thing that the ancient Greeks were talking about, sort of come full circle.
And those things, of course, have an effect on our personalities or our moods or the place we find
Exactly.
ourselves in at different times of the day.
Right. Yeah. So we talk about in our books and also in the game, we use these terms, not because contemporary psychologists may, use these words, because a lot of them don't. They use other divisions of personalities and whatnot, but mainly because it kind of has this long history within our Catholic faith. There were so many spiritual writers that wrote about temperament in relation to the spiritual life, so they use this terminology. So spiritual writers, saints, and even popes have written about temperament. So using these terms, so we use the same terms, just to be kind of consistent with that tradition.
Yeah, well, let's just go through each one, just like a quick overview of each of the four types.
Right. Okay, so the choleric or choleric, depending on your pronunciation of it, is the kind of your original type A personality. They have the quick, intense, and long-lived reactions, and it tends to make them very, decisive and tenacious and driven to follow through. And they set goals, so they're very goal-oriented, very driven. Sometimes they can be accused of rolling over people, once they set a plan in motion or whatever. And the exact opposite of that temperament is the phlegmatic. So you have the choleric, who's like really forging ahead, the leader wants to take charge. And then you have the opposite one, the phlegmatic, who has a very even-keeled, very low-key reaction. So they're not intense, not at all immediate either. So they tend to be like very even-keeled, very easygoing people. In fact, they're the people you love to be around because they're so easy to get along with. They just blend right into the surroundings. They want to be the team players. They don't want to be charging ahead and being the leader. They can be excellent leaders, and if they're encouraged to be leaders, but they just kind of quite naturally have a tendency toward humility and team player, being a team player and just stepping back and like watching the situation before they jump into it. And then the next temperament is the sanguine, and that's your classic people person. So they're the most extroverted of all the temperaments. So they have the very quick, intense reactions, but not long-lived. So they tend to be rather impulsive, and they tend to be easily distracted or take on projects, new projects. Oh, here's another project that I want to do. Oh, forget that one that I was just doing, yesterday. This one's more fun and more interesting. And they tend to be very, very sociable, energetic, optimistic, always looking on the bright side. They are very fun-loving and just a very generous people as well. Very generous, very forgiving. And then the last type is just the exact opposite of the sanguine. So the melancholic is the most introverted, whereas the sanguine, has many, many friends and feels most comfortable constantly doing things, always has to have something going on. The melancholic is much more inward, very contemplative, very introverted, and one friend is sufficient. One good friend, one solid friend. They tend to quality, as opposed to quantity.
Mm.
They are very precise and detail oriented, tend to be very artistic, often musical. They are, they kind of seek after the ideal. So there's this saying that the melancholic so longs for heaven that everything on earth falls short.
Yeah.
So they tend to be a little on the pessimistic side, but they would say realistic because they can foresee all the future obstacles and whatnot. And they tend to be also, this can cause anxiety.
Mm.
So they might foresee all the potential problems and then they start to worry about those things.
Mm.
And then because they're inward people and they're brooding about it, so they have to be very careful with not getting, turning to ruminating or something like that,
Right.
or becoming, tempted to be overly analytical. Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice because this leads right into virtue as well, because there's that middle road in virtue of where you want to be, and then there's the sort of pendulum of being swung this way or that way. So when people hear the word melancholic right off the bat, they're going to say that person tends toward depression, but anyone can sort of tend that way.
Exactly.
But this personality type can tend that way because of what you've just described.
Right. And in fact, it's interesting because they have done studies on this with the temperament of the person, maybe anxious or melancholic or whatever. And they don't necessarily, it doesn't, as you said, it doesn't inevitably lead to depression, but it does impact them if they were to become depressed. Mm-hmm. So if you had, for example, therapists, this is actually helpful for them to know that if they had a client who was both melancholic and depressed, they would need to know that it could take them a little bit longer to kind of work through that. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't mean that they can't get out of it, or doesn't mean that they must become depressed inevitably. No, it just means that if they are, it might take a little bit longer. But so that's why it's good to know, as a therapist, what.
I've already made the mistake of saying personality type when I really should have said temperament type. Right. Okay, so I'm just going to correct myself from what I had just said. But it is important to understand these temperaments as a basis, to draw a large sketch. We don't want to, as you said very wisely at the beginning, we don't want to put anyone into boxes, but as you speak and as you explain each one, I'm sure people are saying, oh, I know this person is like that and that person is like that. But I'll just let you finish up with the last type.
Oh, yeah. Well, the melancholic. So they're very noble. They long for the true, the beautiful, and the good. They're very idealistic. And so wonderful temperament. And sometimes people say, oh, no, I'm this time. Why am I? I remember my mom, when I first told her she read the book, actually, my first book out, was on temperament. She's like, she calls me up on the phone. She doesn't say, hey, congratulations on your book or anything like that. The first thing she says is, oh, dear, I suppose I'm a melancholic. And I go, no, yes, you are. But it's not like one temperament is worse than the other. Yeah. They each have their strengths and weaknesses. That's the thing. That's the beauty of it, is that, we always like to say, do you want a sanguine contractor to renovate your bathroom? No, he'd be like, hey, I think this might fit. Yeah. It looks good. No, you want somebody who's got attention to detail, who's going to measure twice, cut once, very precise, an eye for beauty. So everybody's got their own strengths and weaknesses. from their own temperament. And as you mentioned earlier about virtue too, it gives us a clue as to what virtues we really need to grow in. It's going to be the thing that's harder for our particular temperament. So that gives us like a starting point. And if we have kids, it can give you an idea of what virtues to work on with your, to help them grow and become, well-rounded human beings.
Yeah, I guess. And to be whole, I guess, is another way of putting it, where ideally, you would want the person to have, 25% of each one of the, like, of these four to have them completely in balance. Of course, only one person had that, maybe two.
Yes, exactly.
But, our Lord and our Lady, but,
exactly.
That had these temperaments in sort of perfectly ordered, in the sense that they wouldn't have to examine them to make any adjustments to them. The gift we have is we can examine these things to know ourselves better, and to, as you stated, have a starting point from which to raise a child, or how to interact in a group situation.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
What I'd like to ask you is, why do you feel, as you've done this work, it's important for one to know their own temperament?
Well, gosh, there's so many reasons, but I think, Saint Teresa of Avila said that she would never cease trying to grow in self-knowledge. Even if she were raised, I think the quote was something like, even if I were raised to the highest heavens, or whatever. And of course, she was an extremely wise mystic and doctor of the church. And she wanted to always continue to grow in self-knowledge. And one of the main reasons, I think, is that actually, as we grow in self-knowledge, we actually grow in humility as well, which is like the foundational virtue, without which other virtues we can't acquire. So if we are proud, we're in trouble. When we don't know ourselves, then we just make so many errors, and we probably don't get along with people as well either, because we assume. And I think it's original sin is that I assume that everybody responds the way I respond, or ought to respond the way I respond, and then I judge them harshly, and we don't realize that we're responding out of a particular perspective and a particular temperament, and a particular personality. I mean, we were talking about personality being much larger. There's so many factors. There's also our culture and our culture and our education and all sorts of things that impact us, our total personalities. But just like you wouldn't want to assume that you go to another culture and they have different, there are different things mean different things. Like you want to try to learn what is polite in a different culture, and it may not be the same as ours. Well, it's the same with our temperament. I can't assume that other people ought to respond the way I respond. And that's kind of like the very basic thing. We often get in fights with people over this simple thing that it's simply not necessary. Like when my husband and I were first married, and he's the exact opposite. So we're entirely opposite, temperament wise. So right. I'm like, he would come home from work, and I'd be home with the kids, let's say the babies when they were really small. And finally somebody here to talk to, So he comes in, he's exhausted from work, and he's also an introvert. Okay. So I pounce on him, and I'm like, what are we going to do? I need to do something. We've got to go out right now. Let's take the kids and go out. Let's go out to eat. Or maybe, not out to eat. Maybe because that would be hard because we got the small children. But let's have a picnic. That's what we should do. Do you want to do that? How come you're not responding to me? It's like I literally have not given him a chance to even, catch a breath or walk in the door. And then I would say, what are you mad at me? What's wrong? That's it. You don't want to do anything yet again, antisocial. No.
Right.
And then all the harsh judgments, come,
Sure.
But so that's an example of something that then I discovered temperament and I realized, oh my gosh, that's just his God-given temperament. He needs to have some time to think before he responds. He needs to have some time to kind of, have a little quiet space after work because he has to decompress because he's, he doesn't feed off of constant energy.
Mm-hmm.
He needs that quiet time. And I'm just different. We're different. And he's not doing it on purpose to, harass me or annoy me or because he's mad at me or whatever. And so like a whole bunch of arguments just completely go by the wayside once you realize what the other person's temperament is and what your own temperament is. So
yeah. Well, people can have mixed temperaments too. It's not like you're one of these things. And there was a website that you were involved with, I guess, helping design called the temperamentquiz.com. So people who are interested in like taking the quiz, I did. And I found it quite interesting, accurate, actually. Yeah. And I discovered I have kind of a mixed type.
And most people are, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So can you just talk about that? How people can read that?
Well, definitely take the quiz because it's fun, but it's not like a hard and fast science at all because like the percentage, sometimes people take it multiple times and the percentages will probably change. Like if it says you're, 60% this and, 40% this, but because sometimes I think, depending on our mood or whatever's happening in our lives, the percentages, they'll shift a little bit, but so it's not like it's, you can't say, I'm 50% this and 50% this, and that's it for forever. But anyway, it's just fun because, so I created
it's a baseline.
The questions, and we had, on the back end of it, we had like the really smart, computer scientists, analyzing the data and whatnot, to have it turn out. And we used, and we also had, my daughter is actually a psychologist as well. And she was advising me on the best type of quiz, that what tends to have the most accurate results. And so we kind of, we combined all our efforts to come up with this fun and quick test. It's very easy and fast. So, I do recommend people taking it. But the other way to find out about your temperament is to play our new game. Just as a little promotion, but I'll just mention that. I'll throw that out there.
No. We're going to get to the game because Laraine has created this wonderful game, and we're going to talk all about that. But I just want to ask you, as a mother, as a wife, you had 4 children, you've got 8 grandchildren. Mm-hmm. How does an understanding and a knowledge of these temperaments, how does it help you not only be present to the people around you or the different types, but to just have a more of a compassion and understanding for, like in a large family situation like that? How has that helped you?
Oh, that's a great question. And I think it may be the most important use, I think, the use of this tool of temperaments, because I think really in a family, understanding our children, we really have to, as you said, really be present to them. And I feel like so many parents, they sometimes take this one size fits all. I feel like it's really kind of constrictive. And they say, well, we have this worldview. And this is how every single person in our family is going to be, basically. Like they are all, whatever it is, they're all going to be homeschooled, or they're all going to go to private school. They're all going to go to Harvard, and they're all going to play sports, or whatever it is, or they're all going to behave perfectly in church, and they kind of like, then they try to force that view on all the children who may be very, very different. And we found that our kids were all, we felt they were, they were each one of each temperament. So we thought that was it. And it was fascinating because here we are, the same two parents, and one child would come home from school. I remember in high school, she would slam the door into her room. You'd hear her, wailing, like, I have so much work to do. So every teacher gave me something to do. I will never be able to graduate from high school. I'll never go to college. Of course, she became the PhD, right? Right. but she was it was like total meltdown, and study. Then she'd emerge later, and then she'd get all A's on her tests. Right. Then we had another child come home from school. Do you have any homework? No, not at all. He'd go out to play. We discovered he was defining homework very narrowly. Sure. Homework was, it didn't count any projects due or, tests coming up tomorrow or, oh, that kind of homework, science project tomorrow. Oh, I didn't think you meant that kind of homework. And he would be, off play. So these are our kids and they're entirely different. So we had to kind of develop different strategies, with each child. So, it's so amazing, like, to me, like the whole understanding of temperament, that if you have, in fact, it came out of quite a while ago. There were these two, I think they were psychiatrists, Doctors Chess and Thomas. I think they were, and I can't remember where they were, but they did longitudinal studies on temperament. And they, one of the things they were really, really focused on is when a parent assumes there's something wrong with the child, but it's actually their temperament. So they had so many parents coming in with, oh, my child has ADHD. Oh, my child has, anger management problem. Oh, they're labeling kids, but as it turned out, it was actually they were misunderstanding a temperament issue. So the sanguine can appear, a little scatterbrained, and they are scatterbrained, but they might appear ADHD or something. But really, what you need to do is actually help them focus. So, they might need a little more help in persevering on a project. And then as a parent, you can say, okay, let's sit down and divide it up into how many steps do you have to do in order to get this project done by such and such a date. Another parent might say, why should I have to do that? My children should just do that for themselves. But no, I think that's our role as parents. We work with our kids to try to help guide them, in the way that they most need it. So our sanguine child needed help breaking down the tasks and, into small chunks that they could accomplish and, feel rewarded after they finish that task. Our melancholic child actually needed help maybe in, calming the anxiety. It's like, it's not as bad as it seems. I know you remember the last time you took a test from that teacher, you got an A, you always get A's, it's probably going to be okay this time too, or whatever it is, or maybe a little help in, becoming more sociable and then the sociable one, you kind of like restrain them, it's like, no, you may not go to, 5 parties this week. Right. Yeah. So we took not a one size fits all approach. And I really think that is beneficial to kids.
And of course, children do have serious problems with ADHD or ADD. True. And so this is just like at least one step in, as a parent, in increasing your compassion and listening skill toward your child, or understanding, or widening, or at least looking at it through a different lens before. Obviously, it could be a precursor to understanding. No, you could be doing all of these things and then say, no, like there's a problem here that needs to be addressed in another way, obviously. But in this case, instead of jumping to that step, you are taking a more active role in that parenting, situation, knowing your own type as well, like knowing your own type. So, and knowing when you're dealing with an opposite or a complementary temperament, and how your reaction is going to be in that situation. So,
right, exactly.
and this is, I think, where you come to this title of your game, which is called Know Thyself, right? Let's talk about how you turn these things that can be very serious tools, tools that can really help families come together, can help workplaces come together, can help all kinds of situations where people have to interact with one another and know themselves and other people better. So how did you begin to approach creating or turning this into a game, which is always associated with fun?
Yeah. Well, that it actually kind of started with so now our kids are all adults and now they have kids, of course, but our adult kids just love to play games. And it's funny because like when I was growing up, I think I had like Monopoly and, Clue or something, we had like very limited
Risk.
games. And they have a gazillion games. And so it kind of, that's what kind of prompted my interest. Was like, wow, people really enjoy playing games. And it's such a wonderful way of really bonding with each other and just having fun together and just like I just thought it would be a great way to bring people together, whether it's in a family or it could be in a workplace. There's so many ways you could use this. But yeah, so just started working on how to play the game. We had various trial runs with the adult kids and their spouses, so we said, like, how could we play this game? We could try it this way or this way. We did various trial runs and finally settled on a particular way of playing it. Actually, I kind of modeled it on another popular game that's called Apples to Apples. So yeah, it's so basically I came up with 480 cards, so these little temperament cards.
Wow.
People who can't see them, but you can see.
Yeah.
So
they're like playing cards.
It's like playing cards, yeah. And
so there are 480 cards in this deck.
with a word on them, and they're not. Some of them are going to be, you're going to know. Like this one says "always right." That's but or party animal. We've got party animal, but some of them are not as obvious. So like this one is too many hats. This one is reads the small print. Here's likely to fall on sword.
So the cards get dealt and these words get said, and then what happens? Like people have to guess, or they have to write it on. So
everybody has like 5 cards in their hand, and then there's. One person is chosen to be the judge, and this role will rotate around the room. So the judge will say to the person on his left, who is David? If you were playing with us, then we would all look at our cards that they've all been randomly dealt, right? So we'd all look at our cards, and I'd have to see which one am I going to pick for David. Okay, so, and then I put that in the center, and then we turn the cards over, and we can lobby for our own card or lobby for somebody else's card if there's one that just is, pointless, doesn't work. So maybe I chose likely to fall on sword, and then the judge ultimately decides, and then you get the card that's chosen, and then at the end at the end of the whole game, everything rotates who we are talking about and who is the judge until everybody has a turn. And at the end, you can look at your cards and see what is the predominant color that's in there, which will give you a clue as to what other people think your temperament is, which may or may not. You get a chance to put in a card too, so your card may be chosen. So it's like a mix of what other people think and what you think. So sometimes people are surprised at what other people think about them.
No, because I mean, there's something I often say, and we all have, to a certain degree, blindness.
Yeah,
and I I still laugh about this, but somebody once said to me, you're really intense. And I was like, what?
What
What are you talking about? Me? I'm intense? Like, How can you say what me? No, like I'm in my mind, in my internal experience, I was like Mr. Laid Back, easygoing, okay, well, Mr. Go with the flow or whatever. I had no clue
Isn't
at
that
all. And
funny
that's
how
what I
that
talk about in blindness. Like we've
Yes.
all
Hmm.
got this kind of blindness, but this the way you're telling me it's structured, it sort of shines the light on how you're perceived in the world.
Yeah.
And, whether or not you want to make an adjustment based on that information is always for someone to take, right?
Right.
But what kind of things have come out of playing the game? Like, what have you seen or what have you heard? What kind of feedback have
Well,
you had?
we've heard everybody so far. Everybody that has played it has said they really enjoyed it, which is my number one goal, because it would be not a good game if it was boring, or if it was like, if people were like, oh, well, that was a learning experience. You know what I mean? Because it's supposed to be a learning experience, but it's overall a game should be fun.
Sure. Yeah.
Primary. Then it won't. Otherwise it won't be a good game. So everybody has said that they have enjoyed playing it, and a lot of time, a lot of laughter, hilarity has ensued, which is good. That's what we want. And one time when we played it, I think the same kind of situation. A card was turned over, and everybody said, "Oh, this is so and so. Yes, this is definitely you." And everybody agreed, and the person in question was like, "What? Really?" Yeah, yeah, I know, exactly. Yeah, and so, but then we all laughed about it because none of the cards are like mean or anything. So it's kind of like a wholesome Cards Against Humanity.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's nice. So you've played it with your family. How is the game suited to families or that? Like, how do you feel about it?
I think it's perfect for families, but we do think it's like ages 12 and up is we're kind of recommending, only because younger kids might have a little trouble with it. But who knows, if they're really good readers, very bright, younger ones might be able to also. We sent it, or a friend of mine out in California bought a copy of it. So she's going to try to play with slightly younger grandkids. So we'll see. I'm waiting for the report. But it's also been played at work. Sophia Institute, they played it together, and they said they enjoyed it. So they had a good time.
So it's also useful sort of in work situations or in get to know each other kind of situations.
Yeah, kind of team building sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
So I was thinking maybe in, ministry, like where you kind of want to get to know people, or I don't know, bring them together. That's just another option for it. So I think there's lots of opportunities. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned very early our temperament is God-given, and I agree with you on that. But I want to know, like, can we change our temperament? Not that we want to change something that was ultimately a gift to us.
Right.
But can we change our temperament?
Well, we kind of think we don't change our temperament because it's kind of just that. Remember, it's not the whole of your personality. So it's really only that part of you that tends to react in a certain way. So I have struggled like my whole life practically with not trying not to argue so much. The choleric temperament has a tendency to argue, debate. Debate would be the polite word for it. But it's like you'd think by my age that if you could change your temperament, I would have changed it by now. But having tried to work on this, but really, it's the goal. I think is to grow in virtue. So we all want to be more Christ-like, and it was St. Ignatius of Loyola. I think he was like very, strong, hard, strong-willed and rambunctious and whatnot as a young person. But then they said as an older, by the time he died, he was meek, and humble and all this. But he had grown in virtue. He had grown in the virtues. He had become Christ-like. So he, instead of just responding in the way that he kind of naturally did as a young person, he grew in these virtues and became more Christ-like. So I think that that is that's a hard task, but I think it's what we're all called to do. And so it's kind of, I mean, it's kind of like maybe our temperament is the cross that Christ gave. I mean, some people
Yeah,
have
part of
very
it.
lovely temperaments and they're just so beautiful. You think, well, they don't have anything to work on, but they do, because everybody does. Nobody's perfect, but sometimes a temperament can be very difficult. There's another saint I was thinking, Saint Jerome. Yeah, he was so difficult. I think he went away to live in a cave. He knew he was difficult. And then he ends up, translating the Bible. So out of his difficult temperament comes this great work for the church. But it's a cross, but it can be a cross, but growing in virtue is always a wonderful goal for all of us to work toward. So.
Oh, I know. I agree wholeheartedly on that.
Yeah.
I agree wholeheartedly on that. And it's so true, because anything that points us toward virtue, or a part of our character or our essence or our temperament, that can pull us into a kind of humility or compassion toward other, or toward ourselves, even internally, where we have internal struggles, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point that you're making.
And this is, I think, why I love the name of the game, which is Know Thyself. We're all called to sanctity, and the only way we're going to work on our own faults is to actually know ourselves better.
Right, exactly.
And if you are one of those people who likes to work toward a goal, or say, okay, well, I want to increase my holiness, or I want to, understanding who you are at a fundamental level like this, even as just a general point or an indicator to say, okay, this is a base, this is a starting point where this is where I begin.
Right.
It can really allow us the opportunity to start to aim toward that, what we're called to at baptism, right? Which is sanctity. So,
and also I think another aspect of realizing that we're not, that we are all different and we have different ways of responding to things, that also we grow an appreciation of working together as a team, where you want to have, like, if you have an apostolate or something where you're trying to accomplish something and you have a team, you want people of all different temperaments on your team, because you can supply, somebody else might have that aspect that you don't have, or whatever, that brings to the table that can be really helpful. So I think that's another way of looking at it. I think St. Catherine of Siena, she had asked, in her dialogues, I think she said, at one point she asked God, like, why can't we have all the natural virtues that we need to become saints? Like, why can't I just have it now? And then and why can't I have all of them? Whatever. And I'm paraphrasing, obviously. And then he replied, because then you would not have you would not be charitable, because you would not have need of other people. You would not need other people. And when we realize, like you said, you know thyself, when we realize that we have strengths and weaknesses, we realize our weaknesses, and we face our weaknesses, we realize I have need of other people. I need to work with these other people who maybe they have the strengths that will be just the thing that I need in this particular project or whatever.
You're also talking about formulating an intention for prayer, whether it's your own internal work, or there's a tendency to want to always pray for other people or other situations, but once someone is armed with this understanding, that can be something to take into your personal prayer for transformation. So understanding this, you can then say, well, help me to be this way, or help me to understand, or open this door of understanding for me. So it seems like there's a lot of gifts that can come out of this process.
Right. Oh, for sure. And I was listening to another podcast of another therapist was actually talking about the idea of how a person who can kind of access like this. Let's say they have a particular temperament. Let's say they tend to be very inward, and they tend to worry and fret and ruminate maybe. So they have that internal focus. They can take that same, knowing that they have that tendency, they can then see how they can turn it into kind of a strength, in that sense that, wait, I'm a very internal, I tend to ruminate. I tend to imagine all kinds of horrific things happening because of this, and then I worry about those things. How about let's utilize my imagination and that internal focus to create some, a great work of art or whatever it is, to use it for the good of society or for the church or whatever, and to just kind of shift the focus a little bit. And I thought that was really interesting too, because it's not just saying, oh, I'm a wretched, I have this wretched tendency. No, your tendency can also be for the good. And how can God use that?
Just going back to when you were describing melancholics, the checklist of things you were saying was so positive.
Yeah.
I mean, I encourage people to rewind and listen to that again for the positives, because there are so many positive qualities in each one of these temperament types. I just encourage everyone not to go to the other side of that pendulum, and find yourself in the middle way, which will be peaceful.
Right.
But there is so much positive in each one of these temperaments that really look at good first, and then look at what to work with.
Exactly. That is very wise.
Well, the game is called Know Thyself. I've been speaking with Laraine Bennett. I've had a great conversation with you, Laraine. Thank you so much. And thank you very much for being with us today.
Oh, thank you so much, David. It's wonderful being here. Thank you.
The Game of Temperaments is available online through Sophia Institute Press. Find The Focusing Way on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and our website, thefocusingway.com.